In the 1820s, the film drops us into the frozen misery of the Missouri River frontier, where Captain Andrew Henry's trapping outfit is trying to squeeze profit out of pelts and bad decisions. The script has Henry hand logistical control to John Fitzgerald, the lead trapper who looks like he's already done this death march a few too many times. Jim Bridger stumbles in with an elk and a plea for help, and the camp treats it as a joke break. This early banter is a classic example of the screenplay inflating normalcy just so it can pop it a second later with violence. That pop arrives instantly. An arrow punches through a man's throat mid-chuckle, and the camp's mood flips from boys' trip to war zone. In one shot, the men scramble behind trees, searching the tree line for an enemy they can't yet see. By the time they spot movement, they're already boxed in. Henry assumes this is the usual frontier capitalism problem. Someone wants their expensive furs, and orders the men to stand their ground. Gunshots answer arrows, echoing through the trees as the movie trades campfire warmth for pure chaos. Hugh Glass enters not as a quiet tracker but as the script's survival engine. He hears the distant gunfire, rushes back with his son Hawk, and instantly reads the battlefield. Instead of heroic last stands, he pushes a tactical retreat, barking at everyone to fall back to the boats. Some men stay to cover. Others sprint toward the river in a panicked, messy escape that costs lives by the second. Only a small fraction makes it onto the Missouri, shoving off while the forest remains full of unseen arrows. The staging here leans on long takes and muddy geography to make the audience feel as disoriented as the characters, which is both impressive and mildly cruel. The attackers aren't faceless savages chasing furs, but Arikara warriors searching for their chief's missing daughter, convinced she's been stolen and sold. The film quietly corrects the trapper's assumption. The pelts are irrelevant. The kidnapping isn't. Their anger, built over days, fuels a no-warning assault, while the men on the boat have no idea what they've actually stepped into. Glass watches the shoreline and instantly sees a new problem. The river is a glowing neon arrow saying, "Follow us." He advises Henry to abandon the water. Fitzgerald, the pragmatic cynic, fights hard to stay on the river because speed, not stealth, is his religion. Henry sides with Glass, and that one command decision quietly turns Fitzgerald's annoyance into a slow-burn grudge. On land, the men bury their precious pelts and prepare for an on-foot slog through the forest, trading fortune for the possibility of staying alive. Fitzgerald mutters and gripes, blaming Henry for the loss and soon redirecting that resentment at Glass and Hawk. He throws out an accusation that Glass once killed an officer to protect his half-Pawnee son, turning a rumored backstory into a weapon. Hawk snaps, and Fitzgerald pokes harder until Henry steps in to defuse the scene. Glass then scolds Hawk for taking the bait, because in this world, hurt pride is a luxury no one can afford. The dynamic here is sharp. The script uses campfire gossip as a character scalpel, quickly carving out loyalties, prejudice, and buried secrets. Once they send the boat drifting as a decoy, the march fully becomes a wilderness survival trek. Henry, still curious, asks Glass if the officer's story is true. Glass responds with the most frontier answer possible: silence and more walking. When the group rests, Glass scouts ahead alone, slipping into the forest's quiet. That quiet is broken by rustling brush, a rifle raised, and a fake scare: 2 bear cubs. The movie gives the audience half a second to relax before unleashing the most infamous "do not pet wildlife" PSA in modern cinema. The mother bear slams into Glass like a furry truck, mauling him with horrifying efficiency. She bites, claws, and throws his body around while he realizes brute strength won't save him. He goes limp, forcing himself into stillness and feigned death, which buys him a few seconds as she backs off. Barely functional, he reaches for his rifle and fires, hitting her. She charges again, ripping into his throat and shredding his body. Even half destroyed, Glass stabs her over and over as they tumble down a slope together, until she dies on top of him with her cubs watching. From a filmmaking standpoint, the bear attack is a showcase of long takes and invisible VFX. It intentionally feels endless so the viewer shares Glass's exhaustion instead of just witnessing it. The other men, drawn by the gunshot, arrive later and heave the bear's corpse off Glass. What they see barely qualifies as a living man. His neck is open, his body is a map of wounds, his leg twisted. Fitzgerald's first instinct is to put a bullet in him and end the suffering, which is both practical and morally nuked. Henry refuses, clinging to the idea that you don't ditch your scout like spoiled meat. He knocks Glass out to dull the pain and improvises field surgery with rags, a needle, and whiskey, essentially sewing together a corpse that refuses to lie down. Elsewhere, the Ree find the abandoned boat, realize their prey has gone inland, and begin tracking through the trees with far more purpose than the trappers have. That night, the Ree chief trades with French trappers, offering stolen pelts for horses and weapons. The French hesitate until he makes it clear that deal is just a nicer way to say, I won't kill you if you cooperate, and they comply. Back with Henry's reduced party, Bridger quietly snips off the bear's claws and tucks them into Glass's bag. A small, hopeful superstition that says, you're not dead yet. Days drag by as the men take turns carrying Glass like a human anvil under Henry's orders. Fitzgerald keeps helping, but the strain and his frustration rise with every step up the mountain. By the time they hit a steep incline, the physical and emotional weight is too much. The men start arguing, led by Fitzgerald, who points out the obvious. They are dragging a half-dead man while the Ree close in. Henry, pushed to the emotional edge, finally considers the coldest solution: shoot Glass and make his death quick. When the moment arrives, he can't do it. Instead, he turns survival into a contract, offering $100 to whoever stays with Glass until he dies and buries him properly. Bridger volunteers with no interest in money. Hawk steps up as a son, not a hired hand. Fitzgerald watches this display of loyalty and announces he'll stay too, but only if he gets the full reward share. Henry clearly distrusts him, but logistics beat ethics, and he leaves Glass in their care before moving on with the rest, haunted by the choice. Glass drifts on a feverish edge between life and nothing, hearing Hawk echo a line from his past. Keep fighting as long as you are alive. Those words trigger flashbacks to soldiers burning his village, his wife being killed, and his child wounded in the aftermath. In that memory, he tells his son to hold on no matter what. Now that same mantra boomerangs back to him as his reason not to let go. The script ties trauma and survival together so tightly that the past becomes less a backstory than a fuel tank. Fitzgerald, meanwhile, is running out of patience and moral restraint. He has already dug a shallow grave, clearly planning ahead for a natural death. When Bridger notices Glass's head wound, Fitzgerald lies with unsettling ease, saying Ree warriors tried to scalp him, assuming they thought he was already gone. Bridger nervously fidgets with his canteen, the tiny scratching sound irritating Fitzgerald until he explodes, yelling at him for it. Later, when Bridger and Hawk head to the river for water and fish, Fitzgerald stays behind and leans over Glass like a grim priest. He tells Glass that staying here means everyone dies and claims the kindest option is to let go. He asks Glass to blink if he's ready to die. Glass fights to keep his eyes open but loses control. The blink becomes a death sentence. Fitzgerald takes it as consent and presses a cloth over Glass's face, trying to smother him. Hawk returns, spots what's happening, and intervenes, yelling for Bridger. Fitzgerald reacts instantly, trapping Hawk's voice with his hand and stabbing him in the stomach. Glass, frozen in his broken body, can only watch as his son bleeds out beside him. By nightfall, Bridger comes back with fish, unaware that the worst thing in Glass's life just happened 10 feet away. When he asks where Hawk is, Fitzgerald flips the question back, pretending Hawk was with him. Bridger is confused but doesn't press it. At dawn, Fitzgerald jolts him awake in full panic mode, claiming Ree warriors are closing in. Fear takes over, and Bridger leans on Fitzgerald's more experienced judgment. Fitzgerald drags Glass into the shallow grave, buries him alive in a thin layer of earth, and insists there is no time left. Bridger hesitates, then leaves his water bottle near Glass as a guilty token before fleeing with Fitzgerald. No Ree ever appear. Left alone, Glass slowly starts to move. With only one usable arm and one leg, he claws his way out of the grave in a sequence that feels like a horror movie, except he's the one resurrecting himself. Every inch forward hurts, but he keeps crawling until he finds Hawk's body. He collapses next to his son, consumed by grief and silence. Morning finds Fitzgerald acting as if life goes on. While talking, he slips up and mentions a different number of supposed re-attackers than in his earlier story. Bridger catches the inconsistency, raises his gun, and demands the truth. Fitzgerald finally admits the Ree story was a lie, spun to get Bridger away from Glass. He frames it as a twisted act of mercy. Staying with a dying man would have been suicide, so he did them both a favor. He even suggests Bridger should be thankful for the manipulation. Bridger stands there shaking, torn between rage and guilt. Sensing that doubt, Fitzgerald grabs the gun and pulls the trigger in his face. It clicks empty, a perfect metaphor for his bluff-based survival strategy. The film uses Fitzgerald's lies less as simple villainy and more as a cynical survival philosophy. Everyone is expendable except the guy holding the rifle. Out in the wilderness, Glass makes a decision. He isn't dying here, not before settling the score. With his mangled body, he drags himself through the forest, scavenging scraps of meat from carcasses to stay alive. Each tiny bite extends his life by a few more crawling steps. Behind him, the Ree arrive at the abandoned camp, which means the danger is now a moving dot gaining on him. Glass eventually reaches the Grand River, connected to the Missouri, and tries to drink, only for most of the water to leak out through his throat wound. The little that stays helps, but not enough. Knowing he can't keep that wound open, he makes one of the film's most brutal choices. He sprinkles gunpowder into the gash and lights it, cauterizing his neck shut in a blast of pain. Days slide by as he recovers near the riverbank and finally manages to stand, if only briefly. The Ree show up again at the river, unaware he's hiding nearby. With no time for subtlety, he hurls himself into the water, letting the current drag him away while arrows and bullets slice the surface around him. The river, which was once a liability, becomes his reluctant ally. He survives yet another round with death. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald and Bridger trek across Dakota and move through a burned-out village, where Bridger quietly hands food to a surviving woman and walks on. It's a tiny gesture the movie uses to separate his guilty conscience from Fitzgerald's ruthless pragmatism. That night, as they eat, Fitzgerald tells a story about his father's faith. His father was the sole survivor of a unit ambushed by Indians, but the real miracle for him came later. Starving, he saw a squirrel that seemed like a sign from God, shot it, and lived. For Fitzgerald, the lesson was simple. Survival isn't about prayer. It's about pulling the trigger when you see the squirrel. Back near the river, Glass crashes into a restless sleep, his dreams fusing images of his wife, their burned village, and Fitzgerald into one surreal nightmare. He wakes to notice fish trapped in a shallow pool and immediately spears one, eating it raw. It's disgusting, efficient, and exactly what the movie wants. A portrait of a man who's dropped every comfort except the will to live. Hearing more movement, he follows the sound and watches a bison herd being hunted by wolves. He stays hidden, waiting for the wolves to finish so he can claim anything left. That night, he discovers someone else already played that game. A lone Pawnee man has chased off the wolves and taken the dead bison. Glass approaches with open hands, signaling that he just wants food. The Pawnee shares the meat without fuss, establishing a brief alliance built on mutual ruin rather than trust. By morning, the Pawnee man sees just how destroyed Glass is. Glass shows the bear claw necklace and pantomimes what happened. The Pawnee shares that his own village was wiped out and that he has chosen not to chase revenge, planning instead to go south in search of his people. Glass decides to follow him, realizing this might be his best shot at getting anywhere before his body gives out. These scenes quietly undercut the white savior fantasy by giving the Pawnee his own philosophy: survival without vengeance, in contrast to Glass's rage-fueled mission. Elsewhere, Fitzgerald and Bridger arrive at Fort Kiowa and rejoin Henry's men. Fitzgerald delivers his performance. Hawk went missing, Glass died, was buried respectfully, and they did their duty. Henry accepts the story and pays out the promised reward with a bonus for Bridger. Bridger, drowning in guilt, refuses the money and slips away, because nothing says, "I totally did nothing wrong," like walking off your payday. Snow begins to fall as Glass and the Pawnee move through the wilderness, sharing a small, almost childlike moment catching snowflakes on their tongues, letting the film breathe for once. The storm intensifies, and Glass eventually passes out in the snow, his body finally giving up. The Pawnee man refuses to abandon him, building a crude shelter and nursing him through the fever. Days pass. When Glass wakes, he finds food left nearby and realizes his companion has moved on. Following the trail, he instead finds the Pawnee man hanging dead, killed by French trappers, the same charming businessmen who traded with the Ree earlier. Glass stays hidden, watching their camp from afar and waiting for night like a patient predator. Under cover of darkness, he sneaks in intending to steal a horse and disappear. He manages to prep a horse but spots one of the trappers assaulting a native woman. The movie hands Glass an ethical fork in the road. Escape quietly or intervene. He chooses option main character, grabs a gun, and forces the man to stop. The woman seizes the chance, grabs a knife, and kills her attacker herself, while Glass shoots another trapper and rides off into the night. On the way out, he drops Bridger's canteen, leaving behind the one piece of evidence that will later betray Fitzgerald's lies. By morning, the Ree catch up again and attack, forcing Glass to push his horse harder while trying to fend them off. The chase ends with both rider and horse plunging off a cliff. Branches break Glass's fall just enough to keep him alive, while the horse dies. With a blizzard closing in, Glass makes arguably his most famous decision. He cuts open the dead horse and crawls inside, using its body as an emergency sleeping bag from hell. It works, he survives the night. At dawn, he drags himself out of the horse and continues, still laser-focused on the idea of revenge. Back at Fort Kiowa, a French survivor arrives, half-frozen and begging for food, explaining that his group mostly died in the snow. The men demand the stolen pelts. He has nothing. When he empties his pockets, Bridger spots his own canteen among the loot and instantly knows something is wrong. He questions the Frenchman, who explains where he picked it up. That's enough to convince Bridger and the others that the dead don't seem quite as dead as Fitzgerald claimed. So they ride out to search. Fitzgerald conveniently stays behind, because nothing says, "I have a clean conscience," like avoiding the search party. Overnight, they scour the wilderness until they find someone in the snow. Not Hawk, but Glass, stubbornly alive. Back at the fort, Henry returns intending to confront Fitzgerald and instead learns he has already bailed, stealing money from the safe on his way out. Henry's fury swivels toward Bridger, who stands frozen in shame. For a second, it looks like Henry might shoot the kid just to vent rage, but he restrains himself and orders him locked up instead. Later, Henry faces Glass and apologizes for everything, but survival here doesn't care about apologies. Glass tells him Bridger is innocent, just misled, and asks Henry to release the boy. Then he moves straight to business. He wants a gun and a horse. Fitzgerald is out there, scared and running, and that's enough for Glass. Henry and Glass ride out together, following tracks in the snow. The trail is clear and relentless. During a rest, Henry opens up about his family, sharing a rare piece of humanity in a movie mostly about people killing each other in scenic locations. He asks again about the rumor that Glass killed a captain. This time, Glass finally answers. He did kill a man, but only because that man tried to take Hawk's life. It's a neat bit of narrative economy. The script waits until now to confirm the rumor, framing Glass's past violence as another chapter in the same story of protecting his son. The next morning, they see smoke ahead and realize Fitzgerald is close. They split up to cover more ground. Glass finds a still warm campfire, proof he's right on his heels, while Henry walks straight into an ambush and is shot. Glass hears the echoing gunshot, runs toward it, and discovers Henry dead and scalped, staged to look like a re-killing. Glass hoists Henry's body onto a horse and continues tracking Fitzgerald with a new layer of anger. Eventually, Glass stops and sets a trap. He places Henry's corpse on his own horse as a decoy and positions himself elsewhere. Fitzgerald spots the rider, assumes it's Glass, and fires. When he realizes he has just shot a dead man, it's already too late. Glass steps out and shoots him in the shoulder. Fitzgerald flees deeper into the forest, but Glass pursues without hesitation, and the chase ends by a stream where they drop guns and go full primitive. They fight with knives, an axe, and bare hands in a muddy, bloody brawl that makes every previous injury feel like setup. Both men are battered, but Glass keeps pushing, fueled by loss, rage, and the simple, stubborn refusal to die for free. He eventually gets the upper hand and pins Fitzgerald, poised to finish him. At that precise moment, the Ree arrive on the riverbank. Glass freezes, remembering the Pawnee man's line about revenge not being his path. Instead of killing Fitzgerald himself, he drags him into the water and sends him drifting toward the Ree. They do what they came to do. They take Fitzgerald and kill him without hesitation. Glass waits, expecting to be next, but the Ree pass him by. Among them is the young woman he helped free from the French camp, the chief's missing daughter. With her safely returned, their story is complete, and Glass is no longer their enemy. He's left alone in the snow with nothing but his scars and the faintest sense that the universe has finally balanced something. In his last vision, he sees his wife standing before him. She looks at him, then turns away and walks off into the distance. He watches her fade, a man who has lost almost everything and yet refused to stop crawling forward. The film ends less as a triumph of revenge, and more as a brutal meditation on how survival itself can become the only thing left when justice, faith, and comfort are all stripped away.